So today I'm just doing some printing, and that is exactly what happens when you set the machine up. Trying to think about I'm going to blame that on the recording. I'm just setting the machine up. It's still all been cleaned down from its previous use, and this is the extruder unit. It's in pieces at the moment. But this is effectively what I'll be using to extrude the porcelain through the machine. You'll see a little bit about that like in a moment when I'm kind of loading and printing. But at the moment I'm just doing the assembly of the actual unit. So this is something that I designed myself. You've got a Teflon auger screw, and that effectively just being turned by the motor and driving the porcelain down through the machine. And you've got assistance from an air compressor as well. So that's now attached to the stepper motor here. But what I'm doing today is I am so close to running the wax pump machine that I've been building. I have been working on a video of that. Maybe that's already been posted by the time I'm posting this, or maybe it'll be coming shortly. But it's effectively a kind of machine that I've been designing. And it is to pump wax into my porcelain moulds and then pump it back out. And I am so close to actually setting up the machine. This piece, I keep detouring, but this is actually a 3D printed bracket that's on its absolute last legs. But yeah, I'm so close to running the wax pumping machine now. But before I turn it on for the first time, I just want to connect it to a little test mould that I'm going to make and just kind of check the speed of the motor that I want to run at, maybe some temperature settings, and just kind of any other issues that I hadn't kind of planned for. So I'm hoping to get that printed today, and at the moment I'm just preparing the extruder unit to fit onto the machine. So this is the paste extruder that I designed first in Autodesk Fusion, and then I've now kind of, as you can see, built it. So here you've got a NEMA 23 stepper motor. So this is 360 degrees allocated into kind of steps, and then the motor can coordinate how far it's turning through how many kind of steps it's being told to turn. So that helps kind of with the accuracy of the extrusion. And this is something you'll find on all kind of, I've got so much like clay in my hair. This is something you'll find on sort of all 3D printers, CNC mills, a lot of kind of robotics. So the clay enters through here, passes down here where it meets that Teflon auger screw I was showing you, and then it is extruded at the bottom from here through what I think this is like a half inch, maybe inch, kind of BSP threaded tap part. And so in this instance I'm using super chunky noodles, so we're going with udon today rather than vermicelli. And that kind of defines the thickness of the extrusion, the extrudate, the noodle, whatever it is that we're calling it. And as I say, the technical term I think is extrudate. So that is the extruder. And so once the extruder unit is put together, I mount that onto the machine. And then the next process is for me to be filling this aluminium tank here. I'll be filling this up with porcelain. And so here is that same tank now filled with porcelain. And so when I started 3D printing using plastic, obviously your kind of energy for transition in the material is heat. Your plastic requires heat to be melted and extruded. It then requires the loss of heat to cool and solidify. And obviously that's kind of quite key to the process. And the only state at which you're putting heat through it generally is with the actual electrically kind of powered extruder unit. The thing I love about clay is you're just working with water. You're either adding water to soften it, or you're removing the water and you're kind of hardening it. But there's a whole load of different qualities that clay takes on depending on what stage it's at. And one of my favourites that makes it so particularly useful for this process, and this I believe, again, I'm not a ceramicist, but I believe this quality applies only to porcelain. I've tried printing with a few different clays, and I haven't found the same kind of quality to exist. And so the porcelain is extruded onto these kind of print beds into the moulds. During that process, I'll start kind of finding features such as nipples, maybe armpits, faces, nostrils, ears, and pulling those out of the kind of figure. And you end up with this sort of ceramic shell in which your cavity is currently your kind of sculpture, existing as a ghost in almost some way. And my job is obviously to capture that and distill it and remove it from that kind of shell. And porcelain has this amazing quality that when it's no longer cold to touch and it's completely dry, when it's submerged in water, it almost like fizzles and crackles and like pops. Whereas any other clay bodies I've worked with, then you turn them into water, when you submerge them in water, they almost go like back to leather hard sort of clay. In which case I wouldn't be able to kind of excavate my waxes from this muddy kind of shell so easily. But with porcelain, once it's submerged and it's kind of bubbling at the surface, you give it a little bit of time, and then it almost, I go in with an air compressor and I kind of excavate the wax. And there's this really amazing kind of analogy with metamorphosis, I think. And so I'm constantly looking at transformation in my work, whether it's the figure starting as a man on an inflatable dinosaur suit and ending up as a sort of ostrich-like creature bowing down at the water pool to feed, such as the brass sculpture in the last one. I'm always looking for this kind of transformation. And side note, a key, I think, to any successful transformation is that it can't be slightly undercooked. And what I mean by that is that it needs to have taken on a completely new emergent quality that's not present in its beginning ingredients. And my favourite kind of example of that is you have this idea of you're cooking with your eggs and your chalky chips and your flour, and you're building your cake and you're putting it in the oven to cook. And once it's transformed, you remove it, you slice your cake, you don't see a layer of your eggs and your chalky chips and your kind of flour. There's an emergent cake there. Some things emerged that wasn't really present in each of those kind of ingredients. And that for me, in any artwork that I look at, is does it feel raw? Can I see the kind of raw ingredients still? And I think actually so that it would be an emergent quality, something that is not present in its kind of starting ingredients. And actually one of my favourite emergent qualities is in bees. A European honeybee, I believe, has no defence mechanisms against like hornets and kind of those like super bee-like predators. However, the Asian honeybee, if a hornet is to attack its hive, they will often wait for one of the honeybees to be attacked, at which point the rest of the hive will jump onto the hornet, and they will encase the hornet and almost create so much friction by rubbing their bodies up against each other that they cook the hornet inside. And because their body temperatures can go just a couple of degrees higher. And so no single bee obviously possesses the ability to cook a hornet, but together they have this emergent behaviour in which they can successfully cook and defend themselves against hornets. And when I'm going back to transformation, what I'm saying is the moulds they begin as these figurative studies of one thing, but I begin to tease out these forms until we cook the figure and the study into something else. If it's not something else, the wax that's cast gets remelted and goes back through the system. If it's cooked, it then goes on to the foundry and goes on to be cast into brass, bronze, or whichever metal. This is now full of porcelain, and the machine is kind of clean and ready to go. So I'll be hanging this from the ceiling, which is what I need to do at the moment. Usually the hook is about halfway down so I can pull it, but it's currently stuck on the ceiling, so I need to jump up and fetch it, which is not ideal. That takes the load off of the machine. Like, to have this much kind of weight on the machine would be quite dangerous. But I love this at the start when I almost need to raise the sail, which is what I'm doing now. And that's because this is suspended from the ceiling, and now it's just raised, and this connects to the tube and to the extruder. So I'm just going to be fitting that on now, and then hopefully I'll be in a place to begin printing. And now the machine's set up, the plan is to switch the air compressor on and get extruding some clay. The air compressor, you can just see here, Bambi air compressor. This is going to be driving the clay through the machine. So this is just your escape valve down the bottom. Which I'm just closing, you just heard that kind of hissing. Anyway, you'll see me connecting that up to the machine. And now the machine is actually ready for printing. I just quickly, while that air compressor is pressurizing, so for today, I've just quickly put together a test mould, which is just a kind of, so hard doing this one-handed, which is just a kind of empty cylinder you can see here. So the idea is the pump will come in here, this will fill with wax, I'll test it, it will drain and go back out. This is it again, same geometry, mapped out onto the print bed. You'll now see it sliced up into layers, so these are the coils, and then those files get converted into G-code, which is basically just a series of coordinates, just going through the layers, and then the XYZ telling the machine where to go. So I'm loading that onto the machine now. Clay has begun extruding, which is what's happening here. So you can just hear the printer behind me kind of whirring away. It's quite nice just doing a test mould. I want it to turn out exactly like it is already on the computer, so there's minimal kind of interference, which is something I haven't had to do for a long time. And so the plan is I will cut away part of this section here. The pump will enter and this cavity will fill with the wax. I find it so fun how these forms start to take on these kind of sedimentary rock-like forms. You have this kind of nod towards a kind of like layered rock that's slightly been eroded. You get these sorts of lines that start to follow all the different minerals that are in the rock, some weather at different rates, so it enforces that sort of grain. So on one hand you've got this kind of very naturalistic form that's appearing in all of these sculptures, but then also you start to make nods towards other forms in nature, one of which, my favourite maybe, is this sort of Kafka-esque metamorphosis reference of Gregor Samsa's termite-like back. And in this instance it probably kind of, this is less pronounced as a termite's back in this situation because again there's no transformation at play. However, sometimes these these armoured shells that they start to look like take on that sort of quality of a termite armoured back. And again, it starts to nod towards those ideas of metamorphosis. I also love the kind of hive-minded reference that starts to come in whenever you're talking about termites, especially in the kind of lens of technology. But then even more figuratively speaking, we look at kind of Andreas Vesalius, his sketches of these kind of flayed bodies, or even the study of St. Bart after his skin was kind of flayed. You can even see here in the layers of the clay, you get these kind of stripes that start to form. And this is happening in this particular instance just because there's a little bit of interference coming in the motor, which is what you can hear here. That doesn't usually happen. I usually have to introduce it by hand, and I love introducing it in parts that are more muscular, like the neck, the chest, the shoulders. And you start to build up this form that in some part feels quite rock-like, even coral, with, as I say, a termite. But then in some parts it feels very fleshy. You get these sort of muscles or this kind of peeled back skin. And then again, these figures start to emerge. Completely lost track of the time. It's so dingy in here. Probably I don't know how bad it looks on the camera, but yeah, I need to get this light switched on, show you what I've printed, and I think that's kind of where I was planning on being at today. So here we have the print that I did. You can see it's not very big. That's the mould that I'm going to planning to be pumping into kind of this week. But you can just see the pumps on here. These are the two melters. These have 70 litres in each, so I've got 140 litres total. I've built on this system to heat and dispense the wax out of the melters. This is the pumping system here. That's all ready to go. Well, near enough, a few little bits to wire up. And then I'm going to submerge half of this, so it comes to about here. That end point will come into the middle of the mould, and then once this is switched on, the pump which is here is going to draw the wax from here, fill this mould up, and then we're going to return it to the melters, and hopefully we'll be left with some sort of shell. However, there's a few things that can go wrong. There could be a blockage in the pipe. There could be too much pressure. We could have it kind of shooting out the top. My biggest worry, actually, not so much on the small mould, but on the large mould, is that we fill it with 100 litres or so, and then there's a crack in the mould, or something gives way, and the molten, bear in mind it's 60-70 degrees, the molten wax will spill all over the studio, and I might have 100 litres or so of wax just all over the floor. I imagine my studio would end up having like a few centimetres wax covering all over the floor. However, it's looking pretty good at the moment, so yeah, I'm gonna basically wipe down the printer and then get this ready, as in the mould, get this ready for casting either tomorrow or in a couple of days.